So hello everybody, this is Bante Joe here, and I'm just here at a village kuti in Gampaha and thought to record a short Ovāda for the internet. So I thought that could start with just a little meditation, so can lean forward a bit and arch our spine and look about 3 feet in front and close our eyes. And can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in and know when it's going out. If we breathe in a long breath, can just know I'm breathing in a long breath. And if we breathe in a short breath, can just know I'm breathing in a short breath. And can focus on the breath at the tip of the nose. And if notice any patterns of tension or tightness around the nose, around the face, can just let those relax. And can relax any patterns of tension around the cheeks, around the chin. And can practice breathing in and out from this area at the tip of the nose. And when breathing in and out from the tip of the nose, can try to make the mind a bit like a post in the sea. And the waves come up over the post, onto the beach, and then recede back down into the sea. But the post remains where it is. In a similar way, can try to allow the mind to remain still, just observing the breath as it comes in and observing the breath as it goes out. And if the mind wanders off, you can just bring it back to the present moment, to the breath. And before we finish meditating, can spread thoughts of goodwill wishing may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond. In every dimension, may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. And can open our eyes and do a short Ovāda for the internet. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. So I hope that everybody's keeping well wherever it might be. And there's a lone mosquito that's following me around and that's biting me right now, kind of different places. So I might have to shoo him away a bit during the talk. So before monks give a Dhamma talk, the Buddha recommends that they should establish something in their minds, and that is that basically they should establish the Dhamma is well taught by the Blessed One, kind of in all the various qualities of the Dhamma, apparent here and now, timeless, leading onwards, and to be experienced by the wise. Then they should think, may people listen to the Dhamma from me. Then they should think, may they, having listened to the Dhamma, may they understand it. And then the last one is, having understood it, may they practice in line with it. So some of the times when listening to the Dhamma, it can seem like something simple. Actually, I was listening to a talk by Ajahn Chah the other evening, and he was saying that sometimes during the ordinations, his talk's very funny, and he was saying sometimes during the ordinations, people come and they hear the kind of meditation topics that the monks are giving. At every monk's ordination, they're given this meditation topic: hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, and then in forward and reverse order. That's the first meditation topic that any monk learns. And he said, sometimes some really highly educated people come and they start laughing to themselves, they think, these people think, hair of the head, hair of the body, one already knows about that. He said, but these things are with them all the time, but people often don't really know them. So what he's referring to there is that actually, in terms of one's body, the hair of the head, the hair of the body, these things are very actually unattractive things, but people think they're very attractive. And they kind of want to think, I know this, but a person still has this lust arise in their mind. It means that they haven't really known it. And in a similar way, there's been recently a case. This fellow who I know has a lot of faith and likes to do things, but also he can't keep the 5 precepts. You can't kind of not tell lies, and he steals, and you ask people about it. Do you know the 5 precepts? Yeah, I know the 5 precepts, no problem. But they don't know the 5 precepts. So there's a difference between intellectually understanding something and then practicing in line with it. When one practices in line with it, then one can really go further and actually understand it. Whenever a person is doing in the Buddhist teachings, it's interesting in that some of the things that seem very small like they're very insignificant, when one starts to dig up at them, that's where one finds that there's a path that really leads onwards in one's practice. And the Dhamma is said to be something that leads onwards. So it can be the case that one just thinks, oh, that's something, I've heard it before, I don't need to know it, I don't need to do it. But if one starts to actually do it, this is where one actually sees what the flaws are in one's character, what things one needs to uproot in one's character. So I remember as a young monk, I was a young man actually wanting to come to the monastery. I was very kind of, defensive. You have to kind of, in a monastery or in various places, you have to get criticized quite a lot. Kind of most training monasteries, the good ones anyway, you'll be getting criticized because you have to learn to see your own flaws. People have to be able to point those out to you. And also it's good in a sense because it kind of toughens you up. And there can be too much of that. But one actually has to learn to deal with the slings and arrows of monastic life. And one has to learn to deal with the slings and arrows of combating one's own defilements. And so in a good training situation, you'll have your defilements pointed out to you. And eventually you get older, then you should be able to look at those yourself. But or more and more yourself anyway. But initially you have to stay in this environment where you're being trained. I really didn't like it. It was kind of a very small thing, kind of having your bad characteristics pointed out to you. But it can be this mountain that you have to kind of dig up under. Keep kind of digging at it until you become somebody who's able to be, until one tries to train to be somebody who's able to be compliant, who's able to take criticism and is able to use that criticism constructively. So it's something that can go on for years. I remember in my 3rd or 4th year at the monastery, just kind of feeling, this I got criticized for something. I can't tolerate this. How many more years do I have left for Nisaya? So these things, that is just actually a single line in some suttas. It's kind of let them be like humble and not conceited. And the Buddha talks about in the Dhammapada learning to be somebody who sees somebody who points out your flaws as somebody who points out treasure. But the actual practice of it is something very different. Something that sometimes requires years of undergoing criticism to try to get good at it. So in a Buddhist country like Sri Lanka, or various places, and there's a difference between Buddhism in the West and Buddhism in Sri Lanka, or Buddhism in Asia in general. And Buddhism in Asia in general, Buddhism is a good thing. People view Buddhism as being something good. If you practice Buddhism here, or people see you as practicing Buddhism, then your status goes up. It's kind of it's something not just for monks, actually lay people too. Their status can go up when people perceive them as being somebody who practices Buddhism. In the West, it's something different. It's something, oh yeah, that's kind of good, but it's still something a little bit weird. There's not your status, or people won't actually generally give you anything or give you much if they see you as practicing Buddhism. The institutions for Buddhism are not really well established. So for a person in the West trying to find these very small stones and overturn them is something that they have to do because they notice that they're suffering. It's something that they actually have to go against the grain of their society in a certain way. The Western society is set up for materialism, so one has to go against the grain of Western society. One has to learn to train oneself in renunciation, especially. That's the weirdest thing about Buddhism in Western society. One has to learn to see the small flaws in the things that the world praises and learn to give them up, learn to renounce them, even in the smallest ways. And what this will gradually do is start to pull one away from society and have one staying alone more, have one spending more time at monasteries, more time at retreats, more time with people who have these similar values. But it can proceed through looking for these very small flaws in things. With this very small flaw, this discrepancy between I'm trying to find happiness and, I'm getting this money from my job. Is it giving me the happiness that I want? when I get this new thing, is it giving me the happiness that I want? One has to look for these discrepancies, and in this way, it's like digging out these rocks. When I was a little kid, I used to like to kind of dig sometimes in the ground, try to dig out rocks. And sometimes the rock might be really small at the top, but you keep digging and it was actually this massive rock. And sometimes the rock at the top was really small, and you just dig it out and it'd be finished. So in a similar way, some of these very minor flaws that one might look for in terms of renunciation in the West, these are things that can lead to really big boulders. And if one isn't advancing in one's practice, one is going on retreats, one is doing different things, and one feels like there's a barrier, one may want to look towards renunciation. Yeah. What are the things that I'm afraid to give up, that I haven't given up, and that I've passed over? Now, for people practicing in Sri Lanka, it's a little bit different, because Buddhism, these are the two places where I've lived, so I can kind of comment on these places. I've spent some time in Thailand too, but I don't know the culture there very well. But for one practicing generally in an environment where Buddhism is quite strong, it can be different. The danger in a place where something is very successful can be complacency. It's when praise starts to come to a person, they become less able to recognize these small flaws in their own behavior and sometimes try to cover them up. This is something that one sees in Buddhist culture sometimes, is that people become well known for being a member of the Buddhist community, and these very small flaws work their ways into their practice, work their ways into their precepts. and they start to break them. They stop keeping them. And as a result, although their status may be there, inwardly they're falling away. Inwardly they're declining. So the guard that one actually has to set up in Asia, as opposed to the West, the guard one has to set up in the West tends to be around renouncing things. The guard one has to set up in Asia sometimes more can be against praise. The praise that's already there for an institution where Buddhism is valued, in a culture where Buddhism is valued, one has to guard against this praise. Because what happens is, with this kind of praise and this fame, is that one's mind launches out towards it. And one sees that as the essence. One forgets about what one is training for. And in this way, one's core can start to fall away. Actually, when you're living in a Buddhist country, you can see this. It's kind of, sometimes people will focus on one particular aspect of training their mind, like dana, and then the rest of it falls away. Even their sila isn't there. They kind of know the 5 precepts, but they don't keep them. I was chatting with somebody, and I was like, telling a lie means even if your wife says, "Do you like this dress?" and you say yes, and you don't like it, that's a lie. These are sincere people, the good people. And he said, well, that happens all the time. How do you avoid that, right? One can go to the temple every single week and keep the 5 precepts. One goes home and tells a lie. This is rotting out the core of one's mind. So it becomes a place that one cannot rely on. And at the end of one's life, although one may have all this praise and status in the community, when one leaves one's life, the community doesn't go with one. It's just one's mind. So if one does not have a stable mind, something stable to rely on, if one's core is rotting out, then at the end of one's life, this is one where one will really see it. And also other people know. So in Asia, one has to learn to set up this guard against praise, this guard against success or status or esteem in the community, to practice the true Buddhist path. And this involves keeping the 5 precepts, not drinking, not telling lies, not stealing. And this, as well as in the West, will take one away from society, will take one away from association with many people, to being alone, to training one's mind. All the time, in whatever situation it is, whether it's in the West where Buddhism is new, or in Asia where Buddhism is old and well established, practicing the Buddhist teachings is always going to be something radical. It will always be something that leads one away from society. It'll always be something that goes against the grain. Almost always in a social sense, because the world at large will always find ways to delight in sensuality. Will always find excuses for breaking the precepts. Always find reasons that it's not the right time to renounce. Always find reasons why things are just too difficult, so I should lie, so I should steal. So one has to look for these small flaws in one's practice. Kind of like a goldsmith, try to look for the smallest flaws. Like a little kid digging up these rocks. The top looks small. One keeps digging, see how big the rock is, and takes it out. So whether one is practicing in Asia or practicing in the West, if one's practice feels stalled, if it feels like it's not going anywhere, one may want to look to these small things. The small things that one overlooked and thought, that's not a big deal. Let's see how big it is. And in this way, one's core can become more stable, one's mind can become more stable, and one's path can open up to something important. Because at the end of our life, we don't rely on society. We don't rely on our job or our money or whatever it might be in the West. And in Asia, we don't rely on our status or our esteem. What we have to rely on is our mind. So we have to make it something stable. We have to make it something good so that it can be something that leads us onwards on the path, as the Buddha taught. And this is the purpose for which monks should teach the Dhamma, to lead people onwards, so that they not only listen to the Dhamma, they not only understand it intellectually, but they actually put it into practice. And ideally, they realize its fruits. Okay, so leave that for reflection, and wishing everybody all the blessings of Dhamma practice.